When, if Stargate finally gets greenlit and Amazon put it into development, is there an opportunity for Brad Wright, Joseph Malozzi, maybe Steve DeLuise to get involved? And if they did, how would it look? Welcome to the Tachyon Pulse podcast, part of the Scitrek family.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.
If you're a regular Sci-Trekker, you'll know that I actually appeared on a podcast once with Brad Wright, one of my favourite days. And I do have, I've always had the opinion, really, that if they get Stargate, Brad Wright or somebody similar should be involved. We know, for example, that Brad Wright nearly was back in 2019, before the pandemic, where MGM actually did commission him to do a script for a reboot of Stargate. A reboot that was going to have Carter and O'Neill in to say, just that's enough, isn't it? Really? So we would have actually had legacy characters. But thanks to the pandemic and then the sale of MGM to Amazon, that never happened. Now, Amazon have been sat on their hands as far as Stargate goes ever since. They keep thinking about things, they keep trying to develop ideas, but nothing's ever actually gone into full-on development or been announced officially. But if it was announced tomorrow, what is the likelihood that, say, Brad Wright could be in charge? Well, sadly, it's very unlikely. The model for creating these TV shows, really, it doesn't work like that anymore. It would be some sort of production company that would have creative control, most likely, in partnership with somebody that owns the studio, and potentially even partnership with a third party. The third party is the one I want to talk about, though, but we'll come back to that in a sec. That is the most likely way of this happening. So, the way it looks to us at the moment, like Stargate will happen, is it looks like it might be Sony that are involved with actually filming it and producing the series. Amazon would obviously be a partner because they own the IP. Possibly Penguin and the Parker or somebody else as the production company that would have creative control over what actually then gets made. They do the scripts, they blah blah blah, the executive producers, etc. Potentially even Penguin and a Parker being in charge of actually full production in a way, similarly to the way the Star Trek model is with Alex Kurtzman and Secret Hideout. We're going to come back to that in a minute. And then potentially there is always the position for another production company involved. That is the most likely way of doing it. So hiring Brad Wright as, say, showrunner, and then Amazon just producing this TV show on their own without other partners is very unlikely. It's just not how it's done very often anymore. Still sometimes, but not very often. And it doesn't seem to be that way with sci-fi. I think partly because sci-fi costs so much money, more money to make than, say, something like The Rookie or Criminal Minds, that they need to spread sort of like the responsibility out a little bit more, it seems. So, what would the opportunity be there for Brad Wright or Joseph Malozzi or Steve DeLuise within that model if that is what happens? Well, I'm going to look at Star Trek and the way particularly one company was brought in. Gene Roddenberry's son, Ron Roddenberry, is the head of Roddenberry. I think it's called Roddenberry Entertainment. And it's a company that is one of the production partners for Star Trek. They were brought in because of Roddenberry's name, basically. But the way they are used is they are sort of like the Star Trek police. Basically, they see storylines and they go over storylines and they discuss them, and they basically then feed back to Secret Hideout on whether something is Trekky enough. They don't necessarily do scripts, etc., but they just check them, and they say occasionally they'll say, look, that's not very Star Trek, or that actually, you're breaking canon there, or this sort of thing. I wish they had more power, because maybe Star Trek would break canon a little bit less often if they did, but they are basically there, and their role is to try to make it Trek. I could see an opportunity for Brad Wright or other producers from Stargate to do something similar. It would mean they'd have to create a production company and blah blah blah, potentially, or be brought in as a consultancy team. But that's the sort of thing that could be perfect. Mark Fergus, Hawk Oastby, that are the main partners within the Penguin and a Parker production company, would run everything creatively. They would be the secret hideout, the Alex Kurtzman of the Stargate franchise. They would, at the end of the day, be responsible. But you could have somebody like Brad Wright in that's basically just there to police the whole thing. That if a storyline starts to go in the wrong direction, somebody there just to give them a bit of advice. Somebody there that can say, if you want this to feel like Stargate and you actually do want to attract new fans but also to not alienate the old fans, that this is a good idea, this is a good idea. And also there just to, say, oh, actually, that does break canon of something that we established in blah, 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 whatever episode. That would be, for me, the best way to do this. Amazon have shown, really, that they don't want to do the project that MGM were planning. If they did, they'd have done it 3 years ago. I've always been told they wanted to bring fresh blood in to create the Stargate franchise, and, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we're going to want something that is going to appeal to modern audiences and is going to, maybe be a little fresher. We don't just want a continuation of Stargate SG-1. I know fans, and I know I'm going to get comments of people saying, yes, we do, but then what other fans will say is, well, it's just the same, and it's boring, and it's like, there's no creativity, where's your imagination, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you just do something new? So there has to be a nice balance of respecting what came before while doing something that's interesting and new to attract new audiences, but also to keep existing audiences entertained. SG-1 actually did that during its 10-run season. Atlantis less so, and then obviously SGU is completely different again. And if SGU had been made just a couple of years later, that show would have got 7 seasons and it would have gone on a streaming provider. I don't know why MGM didn't just sort of like go, Netflix, because Netflix was around at that time. Netflix, do you fancy buying this? I don't know why they didn't, but the business was in absolute turmoil at the time when SGU got cancelled, so that's why. So that could be a model, doing something along the lines of what Star Trek did and Paramount did with Star Trek. Amazon could really do the same. They've got irons in many fires. They've got a lot going on. They really could farm this out to Sony or another production company. It could be anybody at this point, and no decision has been made as far as I know. And bring in somebody like Penguin and Parker, hopefully, to do the creative side, and then bring in Brad Wright, Joseph Malozzi, Peter DeLuise, or a dozen other people that could do the job, to be honest, from the original production team to basically police it and make sure that the show they produce still feels like Stargate. That would be the ideal scenario as far as I'm concerned. But will Amazon do it? I think the opportunity will be there. But the first things first, they need to actually get off their asses and decide to do it. Until then, all of this is just wishful thinking. But guys, get into the comments and tell me what you think. Look, Brad Wright being in charge it's just not going to happen. However much we want it to, it's very, very unlikely. God, I'd love to be wrong though. But can anybody in there make an argument using your head and not just your heart on why Brad Wright should be involved? I'd love to have that conversation with you. So get into the comments and tell me. But also, does this model sort of make sense to you? Is it the best of both worlds, where we get that creative freedom and we get something new, but also get something that still feels like Stargate? Does that production company need to have a little bit more power than Rod Roddenberry and his team have got? I would argue yes, please. Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell notification, because that really helps us out and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, you can go to patreon.com/scitrek, where most of our new videos do premiere first, and you get to see them without the adverts, you lucky bunnies. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time.